A listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Our deep dive this afternoon, the legacy of Pope Francis. Who was the late pontiff? How did he change the Catholic Church? And what's next for one of the world's most powerful organisations? We chat with Joel Hodge from the School of Theology from the Australian Catholic University. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Tuesday, the 22nd of April. Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton will continue with their third leaders' debate tonight, despite pausing today's campaign after the death of Pope Francis. The latest news poll shows Labor is making gains in Victoria, while women are reportedly deserting the coalition. Meantime, the Australian Electoral Commission has launched an investigation after almost 50,000 illegal pamphlets were sent out opposing independent MP Allegra Spender in Sydney. Here is Ms Spender speaking earlier today.
This pamphlet spreads false, misleading and offensive claims about me and does so anonymously.
New South Wales Police are looking into a conflict between a Sydney man and an organised crime group believed to be based in Victoria. It's after a Sydney mother was kidnapped and killed in Bankstown in Sydney's west last week, with her 8-year-old son assaulted. 2 boys known to the woman remain in hospital under police guard. Here is Homicide Squad Commander Detective Superintendent Joe Dewey.
The level of violence against innocent family members of organised crime groups is rare and unprecedented.
And in the US, Harvard University has filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration for allegedly trying to gain control of academic decision-making. The university is fighting back against the administration's threat to review around $9 billion in federal funding that did not comply with a list of demands from the government. The demands were sent to a number of Ivy League institutions. Now it's time to get into our deep dive with Professor Joel Hodge from the School of Theology at ACU. Billions of Catholics around the world are continuing to mourn Pope Francis after the Vatican yesterday confirmed the death of the 88-year-old pontiff. The Pope was seen by many as a progressive, a leader for the people. So how will Pope Francis be remembered? How did he change the Catholic Church? And who will be the next leader of the multi-billion-dollar religious organisation? Thanks so much for joining us, Joel. As we know, the late pontiff was incredibly unwell over recent years and had that extended stay in hospital with double pneumonia. But still, his death late yesterday, our time, came as quite a shock.
It did indeed. A shock, I think, to many people, Catholics and non-Catholics. It looked like Pope Francis may have stabilised in his condition, but he came out of hospital, obviously a very sick man, and on his last days. And so I think we were very lucky to have him for that short period of time after he came out of hospital, able to share the end of Lent, Holy Week, where we commemorate Jesus' death and resurrection, and himself then dying around Easter time and going now to eternal life himself. So in some ways very fitting, but very sad. And I think a lot of people wake up this morning with that sadness that a great man and a great leader and a great man of faith has left us, but also great thankfulness in what he's given.
In regards to what he's given, Joel, many people have commented on what the later Pope's legacy will be. How do you see it? Because he unfortunately didn't make a visit to Australia before he passed away. How do you think he will be seen for generations to come?
I think he'll be seen as a man of great faith who witnessed to the Christian faith, to the way of Jesus in a very simple, humble, straightforward, but very authentic manner. And I think that resonated with so many people around the globe, that he lived that out in the way of St. Francis, who he took his name from. Just great dedication to the gospel, to the mission of the church, to witnessing to the life and love of Jesus. And I think that will be part of his great legacy. And that way of living out Christianity then radiated out into many different areas, into the way that he reached out to the poor and the marginalized, the way in which he advocated for the migrant, the way in which he was trying to be more inclusive of LGBT people, trying to be more inclusive of lay people, men and women in the governance and leadership of the church, the way in which he tried to care for the environment and promote care for the environment, so many different areas. But all of that radiated out of that simple faith.
And in regards to the simple faith, Joel, he, by some, the late pontiff was seen as quite progressive, by others, quite conservative. He was certainly having those really important conversations that the church, the powers, need to have. That's about inclusiveness, about teaching what Jesus would have wanted for all of us, and that is looking after the marginalised, inclusion for everyone. Do you think he was quite frustrated by the machinations of Vatican City and the church, that he was quite progressive but couldn't enact those things that he did want to follow?
Well, I think Pope Francis was a very wise man. He was a very wise person and a great man of spiritual insight and depth. And part of that came out of his Jesuit tradition. He was a Jesuit priest, that great religious congregation started by St. Ignatius of Loyola. And that tradition has a great framework, many resources for being able to help people to discern their interior life and their decisions, especially big decisions. So Pope Francis knew how to discern and make big decisions, but he also knew and discerned where the blocks were. And if he saw a block where people just couldn't agree, he didn't push it. He knew that this is not healthy. We've debated, we've dialogued, but we can't go any further at this time. And therefore, we need to leave it. We need to try to be inclusive. We need to try to help people, accompany people, all that kind of thing. But there's no point in keep beating the same drum and then polarizing things. So Pope Francis was very wise, I think, in that regard. And one of his great legacies is being able to give a process to the church to help in discernment of important matters. That's what was his big contribution the last few years of his papacy. He started the church on this synodal journey, as it was called, being able to bring people together to discern and decide on big issues. And he did that not in a parliamentary sense by getting people to just debate stuff, because the church does that all the time. He actually got them to come together in a very deep spiritual way, to pray together and discuss things at a deep spiritual level. Again, a sign of his great spiritual depth and wisdom. So Pope Francis has bequeathed that process to the church, and hopefully that will carry on as a way for the church to continue to dialogue and decide on big matters.
Joel, great point you make there. We're talking about the future now. So if Pope Francis had those conversations, he knew where those massive blocks were, and then I guess decided he couldn't progress any further. Does this open the door, though, for a new era of Catholicism? The realisation that there are certain discussions or changes that need to be made to include everyone in the Catholic Church. Do you think that will also be his legacy? The door is opened and the next Pope will then move his mission forward?
Certainly, I think he has opened the door to many people and to many discussions that were not as robustly debated at the highest level as they were under Pope Francis. They were debated, they were discussed under previous popes, but Pope Francis opened that up to a discussion that included cardinals, bishops, lay people all together in the same room talking about really key things. Of course, he also had processes around really important issues like women deacons and married priests. He had processes around that, and he knew that there was a tradition that we were coming from, and we had to respect that history and tradition, and we had to decide on things in that context. We couldn't just willy-nilly, throw everything up. But he knew that those were important issues and we needed to discuss them. I think Pope Francis also is in the line, as I said, of the Second Vatican Council. He was a pope of the Second Vatican Council, and that council was very much about trying to engage with the modern world, still holding on to the great riches of the Catholic faith and the life of Jesus and what he taught and the great hope that Jesus' death and resurrection brings to the world. But he did that in a very contemporary way, and it opened up things in a new fashion that I think the next pope will be able to build on and be able to have very robust and open discussions in a way where people aren't afraid. So I think Pope Francis does give us that legacy of really implementing the Second Vatican Council in a full fashion. Again, in the line of the previous popes, but now in accelerating that.
So talking about the next pope, talk us through what the process is now. We have officially 9 days of mourning for Pope Francis. What happens from there?
Well, then we have the cardinal electors who will elect the Pope, the 138, I think, electors who are of age. They can't be above 80. 80 is the maximum limit. So those cardinal electors, most of whom were chosen by Pope Francis, some from Pope Benedict's time, they will come together in Rome and start discussing, praying together, thinking about what the priorities of the church are, what kind of leader it needs, what kind of spirituality they want to promote. So they'll come together in about 15 days or 3 weeks, and they'll set up some basic ground rules based on the already existing canon law around conclaves. And then they'll be sequestered, they'll be put away, they won't blocked out from the outside world, no phones and TV and all that kind of thing. And they'll have a chance to just be together, to really concentrate and pray, discern the Holy Spirit. And then they'll start voting. They'll have day one vote, and then 4 votes, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon from then on until they can get to a 2/3 majority. One of the important things to remember about this conclave is that there are many cardinals from places that have not had cardinals before. So Pope Francis really globalized the representation of the cardinals. In the past, many of the cardinals came from Italy and from Europe. And Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict were already opening that up, choosing cardinals from outside that sphere of influence, where Africa, Asia, Latin America, where the church was growing at great speeds. And Pope Francis really accelerated that and chose people from lots of places that were unexpected, even from dioceses that didn't traditionally have, churches that didn't traditionally have cardinals, which sometimes cause a bit of a scratch of the head for some people because they were wondering what this means. Not so much about, choosing from East Timor or the Philippines or something like that. I mean, it's clear that those places need a great representation of cardinals because they have lots of Catholics, but some places that were unusual, like Mongolia or some dioceses in the United States that didn't have cardinals before. So that throws an unusual thing into the mix because a lot of cardinals might not know each other very well. So there'll be a chance at the beginning where they'll have to get to know each other, talk to each other while they're face-to-face. Some of them might not have met face-to-face before. And so that'll bring something really interesting to this conclave, a really global perspective that will be something new.
And Joel, you mentioned before, we have seen an explosion of Catholicism across many parts, including Southeast Asia, where that's where the strength of the new followers, many say, are coming from. So do you think we could see a pope from some of these strongholds, you may say, in the new Catholic Church?
Yeah, well, we've had a Polish pope, John Paul II. We've had a German pope, Pope Benedict, and now we've had an Argentinian pope. And so who knows what's next? It'll be really exciting and interesting to see. I don't think that the geography is necessarily the determining factor. I think they will be looking for someone of great spiritual depth, insight, wisdom, leadership that will help them think about what kind of pope they want next.
Joel, there's been many tributes and many beautiful messages of people from right around the world that have been lucky enough even to have an interaction with the late Pope, including our Archbishop Anthony Fisher here in Australia. In regards to what we can take away in 2025, there are many, beautiful words being said about the late Pope. But what do you think we should take away in 2025 from the late Pope Francis?
I think that he was just a man of great faith who loved Jesus. He was just so enamored with the way of Jesus, and he just radiated that in his life with great joy. You know, joy was one of his key categories. Archbishop Comensoli of Melbourne has talked about this since the Pope died, that the Pope just radiated joy because he had this great faith and hope. He went through a lot of hard times, but he came out of it with a great hope and faith that Jesus was with him and accompanying him in all of that and loving him mercifully. Mercy was a great theme of his pontificate, and he wanted to spread the mercy and love of Jesus to the world.
Joel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that was Professor Joel Hodge from the School of Theology at ACU. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us so you don't miss our episodes or our deep dive of the day. You can also follow us on our socials, on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, and on TikTok and YouTube. You just need to search Listener Newsroom, that's spelled LISTNR. And we'll be back in your feed tomorrow at 6 a.m. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company. See you then.